They were strangers on opposite sides of the war, until he took a bullet for her. Kansas borderlands. Autumn, 1864. The hills of eastern Kansas rolled like open hands, dry grass waving beneath a pale sky bruised with the smoke of distant fires. War did not draw neat lines in this part of the country. It bled through towns, crept into barns, burned across meadows. And now it was here. Elise Whitaker clutched the side of the ambulance wagon as it jolted over a rut, her knuckles white against the weathered wood. Her nurse's apron, already soiled from days of tending the wounded, clung to her damp frame as wind whipped through the canvas flaps. Gunfire cracked through the trees. "Ride harder," someone shouted. "They've found us." The horses screamed as riders emerged from the brush, Confederate raiders in gray and butternut uniforms, rifles raised. In seconds, the orderly ahead of Elise was shot clean off his saddle. The wagon jerked sideways. Elise was thrown from the back and landed hard in the underbrush, the breath punched from her lungs. She scrambled upright, heart thudding like thunder in her chest. But before she could run, a rifle barrel was pressed to her shoulder. "Don't," a voice said. She froze. The soldier before her looked no older than 25. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a sharp jaw, and eyes the color of overcast steel. Dust clung to his coat. A revolver hung from his belt. He did not blink. "I am not armed," Elise said, forcing calm into her voice. "I am a nurse." A few more soldiers circled in behind him, shouting to each other as they secured the remaining prisoners. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat. The young soldier kept his rifle up. "A Union nurse?" "Yes." She swallowed hard. "But I do not carry a weapon. I tend the wounded. On both sides, if need be." His eyes narrowed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elise Whitaker." He stared at her for a long moment. Around them, the chaos of capture unfolded. Men shouting, wagons being overturned, a horse screaming as it was shot. Elise's fingers curled at her sides, ready for the worst. Then, slowly, he lowered his rifle. "I know what you are," he said. "I have seen enough of this war to know what mercy looks like." Elise did not answer. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stood. One of the older soldiers nearby called out, "McCallan, what are you doing? Tie her up." The young man, McCallan, glanced back at Elise, then replied without looking away, "She is not a soldier. She is no threat." The older man spat. "She is a Yankee." McCallan's voice turned to flint. "So am I, if you go back far enough." The others cursed and moved off. McCallan stepped closer and nodded toward the clearing. "Come on," he said. "They will not hurt you, not while I am here." She followed, still stunned. Her legs moved before her mind caught up. Around her, Confederate soldiers were looting the wagons, kicking through crates of bandages and water flasks. The wounded were rounded up. She saw one of the Union medics, young, barely a man, clutching a gut wound and sobbing. Elise tried to rush to him, but McCallan caught her by the elbow. "Not now," he murmured. "You will only get yourself killed." "I can help him," she insisted. McCallan's grip loosened. His face tightened with something unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he said, "Stay close to me. Do not speak unless I tell you." Together, they crossed the bloody ground. And though she did not know this man, his name, his politics, or his past, Elise felt the unmistakable weight of something shift. Not trust, but perhaps the absence of fear. The outpost was little more than a cluster of tents tucked deep into the Kansas woods, the kind of place drawn hastily on war maps and quickly forgotten once the fighting moved on. Elise Whitaker sat on a wooden crate just outside the canvas tent they had given her. There were no bars, no chains, but escape was impossible. The woods stretched wide, full of men with loaded rifles and orders shaped by suspicion. A small fire burned low in the clearing, barely enough to hold back the early autumn chill. The scent of damp leaves clung to the air, mixing with ash and the faint tang of gunpowder. Luke McCallan leaned against a tree nearby, arms folded, rifle slung over his back. His uniform, though worn and stained with the grit of war, still bore the insignia of the Confederate cavalry. He said nothing, but his eyes never strayed far from her. Elise shifted, glancing at him. "You think I'm going to run?" "No," Luke said after a pause. "If you were the running kind, you wouldn't have been there in the first place." She stared at him, surprised by the nuance in his voice. There to save lives, not take them. Luke nodded slowly, but didn't respond. Moments later, a groan broke through the stillness. A soldier, barely more than a boy, lay on a stretcher outside the medical tent, clutching his side. Blood seeped through the bandage, dark and urgent. Elise stood instantly. "That wound's not wrapped right," she said, moving without waiting for permission. "He's losing too much blood." "Stay back," another soldier snapped, stepping in her path. "She's a nurse," Luke said flatly, stepping between them. "Let her do her work." The soldier hesitated, but Luke's glare left no room for argument. Elise knelt by the wounded man. Her fingers worked fast, cutting the old bandage, cleaning the wound, threading the needle with the precision of someone who'd done it too many times for it to shake her anymore. Luke watched from a few feet away, arms still folded. "You've done this a lot," he said, after a long silence. She didn't look up. "Enough to know when a man's about to bleed out. You ever sew up a man wearing gray before?" Her hands stilled briefly. Then she nodded. "Blood's blood. It doesn't change color based on politics." Luke tilted his head slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. After Elise tied off the last stitch, she covered the wound gently and placed a folded blanket beneath the boy's head. "He'll need boiled water and willow bark for the pain," she said, standing. Luke nodded. "I'll see to it." That night, the wind whispered through the trees, and the fire popped quietly under a sky freckled with stars. Elise sat near the flames, rubbing her cold hands. Luke approached, a tin mug in his hand. "It's not coffee," he said, "but it's hot." She took it with a grateful nod. "Thank you." He settled on a stump across from her. For a while, neither spoke. Then Elise broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder how it came to this? Killing men who might have been your neighbors, your friends, if things had been different." Luke stared into the fire. "My older brother signed up the day Fort Sumter fell. Never made it back. My father said if I didn't fight, I'd dishonor his grave." "And you believed him?" "I believed I didn't have much choice." Elise looked down at her mug. "They told me I'd be a patriot. Said sewing wounds was the same as defending freedom." She glanced up. "But freedom feels a long way from here." Luke met her gaze, something softening between them in the flickering light. "We're both just trying to survive," he said quietly. "War makes liars of reasons." The wind picked up, tossing sparks into the air like fleeting stars. That night, neither of them slept much, but for the first time, they did not feel entirely alone. The days in the outpost were thick with mud and tension. Smoke hung low, the firewood always damp, the men always tired. Elise tried to keep to herself, tending to any wounded when allowed, waiting for a chance to leave, or a reason to hope. That morning, 2 Confederate soldiers barged into her tent with suspicion dark in their eyes. One of them held a folded piece of paper between gloved fingers. "Found this in her satchel," he said, tossing it onto the crate she used as a desk. It was a hand-drawn medical map, field locations, supply routes, markings in ink. "For the hospital supply chain," Elise explained, voice steady. "I'm a nurse, not a scout." "Too much detail for a nurse," the other muttered. "You northern types are clever. Maybe too clever." They dragged her to the center of camp, where the cold wind scraped her cheeks raw. "She's a spy," one of them growled, "sending troop positions to the Yanks." Their captain, A thick-necked man with a permanent sneer crossed his arms. "We execute spies at dawn." Elise didn't flinch. "I've saved 3 of your men since arriving here," she said calmly. "Would a spy do that?" The captain grunted. "If it helped her cover, lock her down." There was no cell, no chains, just a small tent and one man ordered to stand guard. Luke. He did not speak as she was escorted back and left in the canvas tent. The flap was tied shut, but not locked. There was nowhere to run, and they both knew it. He stood outside, silent as stone. Inside, Elise sat on the hard cot, the map still burned in her mind. She had drawn it weeks ago, harmless, routine, part of her duty. Now it had become a noose. Hours passed. Night fell. She could hear the others drinking, laughing, spitting curses into the fire. And still, Luke stood watch. At midnight, she heard the tent flap rustle. "Can I speak to you?" she asked softly. No answer. But the flap opened slightly. Luke stepped inside, just far enough to be seen in the dim lantern light. He removed his hat, but his expression was unreadable. "I didn't lie," she said. "It was a supply map, for a surgeon, not a general." "I know," he said. His voice was rough with restraint. "Then tell them," she whispered. He looked away. "I can't." "Why not?" Luke's jaw worked, eyes dark. "Because they won't believe me. Because to them, you're the enemy. And if I defend you, I'll be the next to face a firing line." She swallowed hard, anger rising behind her ribs. "So you'll let them kill me to stay in their good graces?" "No," he said sharply. I'll try to do something. I just don't know what yet. You could untie the flap, walk me out, right now." "And where would you go, Elise? We're in the middle of nowhere, with wolves in both directions." She had no answer. Luke took a deep breath and turned toward the door. He paused, one hand on the tent pole, the other resting on the butt of his revolver. "I'll be outside," he said. "If anything happens before dawn, I'll be ready." And then he was gone, a shadow against the moonlit snow. Outside, Luke stood motionless for hours, not blinking, not moving, every muscle locked in place. The weight of his pistol at his hip felt heavier than it ever had. He was not loyal to the South. Not anymore. Not truly. But treason was a dangerous thing. So was letting someone good die for nothing. And as the fire died down, and the night grew still, he gripped the hilt of his gun, weighing the consequences, knowing full well that dawn might demand a choice he could never undo. The sky was the color of iron when Elise was led out of the tent, her wrists trembling though they were not bound. The frostbitten ground crunched beneath her boots, as 2 Confederate soldiers flanked her, young, stone-faced, rifles slung tight across their shoulders. Around them, the early camp stirred in murmurs, breaths curling in the cold. Luke stood near the stables, jaw clenched. His right arm was wrapped, still stiff from the bullet graze he had taken the week before. But that wasn't why he winced as Elise passed. It was the look in her eyes. Not fear. Resignation. As though she had accepted that mercy was no longer part of this war. Major Denton, their commanding officer, paced near the central fire, hands behind his back. "Miss Whitaker, we have reason to believe your map markings were not simply for medical logistics." Elise's voice was calm but firm. "I marked hospital supplies. And wounded checkpoints. You can read the legend." "I can read deception," Denton snapped. Luke took a step forward. "Sir, she's not a spy." Denton turned sharply. "You forget your place, McCallan." "No, sir, I remember exactly what my place is." His voice trembled under the weight of held-in rage. "It's not letting an innocent woman get shot because we don't understand how ink works." "Enough," Denton barked. "Take her to the edge of camp. We'll question her properly there." Elise swallowed hard but didn't resist as the soldiers moved her forward. Snow had started to fall again, thin and cruel. They reached the clearing where burnt tree stumps formed a crude ring. A few men were already there, watching, some nervously avoiding her gaze, A bottle passed between two of them. One drank deep, Corporal Rayner. His cheeks were already flushed from liquor. Luke arrived a few paces behind, every step heavier than the last. Elise was placed in the center. Denton approached. "Last chance. Tell us what you were delivering and to whom." "I already told you," Elise said quietly. "I don't lie, even in war." Rayner stumbled forward, the bottle swinging from his hand. "Lying which?" he slurred, raising his revolver. "We lost 6 men last week. You knew where we'd be." "No," Luke roared. But Rayner had already raised the gun, and then everything moved too fast. Luke lunged. The shot rang out. Elise screamed. Luke crashed into her, his arms wrapping around her shoulders as the force of the bullet sent them both to the ground. For a moment, everything was silent, until the dark stain began to spread across his coat, blooming from the shoulder like a terrible rose. Blood. Elise stared in horror. He had taken the bullet meant for her. Voices erupted. Soldiers rushed in, some shouting for order, others dragging Rayner back, his pistol knocked from his grip. Denton shouted for calm, but no one was listening. Elise pressed her hands to Luke's wound, trembling. "No, no, no, stay with me. Luke, look at me." His eyes fluttered open, jaw clenched in pain. "You all right?" "You idiot," she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Why would you do that?" He gave a breathy, pained chuckle. "Didn't have time to think. Just saw the gun. And you." She pulled off her shawl, folding it against the wound. Blood soaked through instantly. Denton stood over them now, face ashen. He could have killed her. "She saved one of ours last week," another soldier muttered. "Saved Tom with barely anything but rags and boiled snow." "She's a healer," someone else said. "Not a damn spy." Denton looked around. No one would meet his eye. Not anymore. He cleared his throat. "Let her go." Elise froze. "What?" "You're free to leave," Denton said. "You were right. You're not the enemy." She didn't move. "And him?" "Your choice," Denton said gruffly, turning away. "But I suggest you run before I change my mind." Luke grunted. "You should go." "Shut up," she said, voice trembling. "You don't get to tell me what to do." He smiled faintly. Always so stubborn. She tore another strip from her underdress, pressing it into the wound. "Someone bring me water. Clean rags. Whiskey if you have it." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps, boots retreating, boots returning. Someone brought a canteen. Another knelt beside her with a cloth. Luke faded in and out, but Elise never let go. As the camp dimmed into dusk, wordless and watchful, she worked by firelight, a white dress stained red, hands steady, heart breaking, but staying. She had been told she was free to run, but she stayed, for the man who hadn't hesitated to bleed. The blizzard came without warning. Snow slammed the trees like cannon fire. Winds howled through the forest like ghosts mourning the dead. The canvas tents buckled under the weight of snow, and soon the men abandoned the open encampment for the only real shelter they had, a half-collapsed hunting cabin left behind by trappers. Elise had refused to leave Luke behind in the medical tent, not after what he had done. When the commanding officer waved them off with a grunt, she wrapped his injured shoulder tight, packed what supplies she could carry, and helped him to the cabin, step by agonizing step. Now, days had passed. The outside world was a wall of white. No scouts could leave, no reinforcements would arrive. The soldiers passed their time in uneasy silence, playing cards, sleeping in shifts, muttering about home. Inside a smaller back room of the cabin, Elise and Luke occupied a corner near the fire. His shoulder was still bandaged, the wound healing slowly. He winced whenever he moved, but never complained. Elise tended to him with the same steady hands she had offered men on both sides of the war. But something had shifted between them, something unspoken, hanging in the air like the cold. Luke broke the silence first. "I thought I would feel proud," he said one evening, voice low, as Elise cleaned the wound. "When I enlisted, when I put on the gray coat, I thought I was protecting something worth dying for." She paused, not looking up. "And now?" He turned his head, staring into the fire. "Now I don't even know what I'm fighting for, or who I'd be if I took the uniform off." Elise pressed a fresh cloth against his shoulder. "You are not your uniform." Luke let out a bitter breath. "Aren't I? Every time I look in the mirror, I see the man who didn't stop them." She looked at him then. "I never pulled a trigger," he went on, eyes distant. "But I stood still while others did. I watched civilians dragged from homes, farms burned, and I said nothing." His voice cracked. "That makes me worse." Elise reached for a tin of salve, her fingers trembling. "You're not alone in that," she said quietly. "During the worst of it, I saw Union surgeons refuse treatment to men just because they wore gray. One of them bled out on the table next to me. I did nothing. I was scared. I was complicit." Luke turned to her, his gaze raw. "You're not like them." Her eyes shimmered, rimmed with the fire's glow. "Neither are you." A long silence passed between them, heavy and honest. "I used to believe in the Union like it was a church," Elise whispered. "But the longer I served, the more I realized, neither side holds all the good or all the evil." Luke nodded slowly. "War turns us into things we swore we'd never be." Outside, the wind screamed, rattling the shutters. Inside, it was quiet enough to hear their hearts. Elise leaned forward, her hand brushing against his. He did not pull away. "You saved my life," she said. He shook his head. "No. I could not let them take you. That is all I knew in that moment." "That's everything," she whispered. For a while, they sat like that, hands barely touching, warmth blooming between them despite the frost. They didn't speak of sides after that. Not that night, nor the ones that followed. In the silence, something fragile and beautiful began to take root. Not as soldier and nurse, not as North and South, but as two broken souls who no longer knew where they belonged, only that, somehow, in the ruin of this war, they had found shelter in each other. By the time the snow began to melt, the woods no longer looked like a prison, but a fragile sanctuary on the edge of vanishing. Elise stood outside the small cabin, wiping her hands on her apron after checking Luke's bandages. He was stronger now, able to walk with a limp, though his shoulder still bore the mark of the bullet he had caught for her. The sound of hooves came like a tremor through the ground. 6 riders in blue approached from the tree line. Union soldiers, rifles slung over shoulders, their expressions hard and weary. The Stars and Stripes banner flapped faintly behind them. One of them dismounted, a young lieutenant with frost in his beard and suspicion in his eyes. "Elise Whitaker?" he called. She stepped forward, jaw tight. "I am. You were reported missing. Some say captured, some say worse." "I was neither," she said firmly. "I've been here, helping the wounded. That man," she gestured to Luke, who had stepped outside the cabin behind her, "took a bullet meant for me. He saved my life." The soldiers turned to Luke, eyes narrowing. His gray jacket, though worn, still marked him unmistakably as Confederate. "He's a rebel," one of them snapped. "You should be turning him in, not defending him." "I owe him my life," Elise said. "He's no threat, not anymore." But her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the sick understanding that it would not matter. The lieutenant gave the nod. 2 soldiers moved forward, rifles raised. "Remove your weapon," one ordered Luke. Luke didn't resist. He unbuckled his belt slowly, handing over the revolver. His eyes never left Elise. "I should have burned that jacket weeks ago," he muttered under his breath. "Is he your prisoner?" the lieutenant asked Elise. "No," she said, voice breaking. "He is not." Luke looked at her then. No resentment, only something infinitely sad. "They're going to take me," he said quietly. "You know that. I won't let them. You cannot stop them." Elise moved as the soldiers stepped toward him. "He's not a spy. He's not a killer. He's just Just someone who was born on the wrong side of the line. That line killed thousands, one soldier snapped, including my brother. He saved me, Elise said, eyes burning. Does that not count for anything? The lieutenant hesitated, then said, he'll be transported. There will be a trial. That's the best I can offer. Luke turned to Elise as the cuffs were brought out. He didn't flinch. I guess it had to end like this, he said softly. No, she whispered. No, I was going to follow you, wherever you went. I was going to leave all this behind. One of the soldiers stepped between them, gently but firmly holding her back. Luke was hoisted onto a horse, wrists bound. The morning sun glinted off the melting icicles, dripping like tears from the eaves. As they began to lead him away, he turned in the saddle and looked back one last time. If there's another life, his voice cracked, I'll find you first. Before the war, before the sides, before any of this. Elise's knees buckled. She sank into the wet slush, skirts soaked, her hand pressed against her lips as sobs shook through her. I'll wait, she whispered. In this life or the next. The forest held its breath, and the thawing silence swallowed them both. Spring of 1865 arrived not with celebration, but with silence. The war was over, flags lowered, rifles stacked, graves filled faster than ledgers could count. In the corners of the country where no one wrote poems, people simply tried to begin again. Elise Whitaker found her beginning in a military hospital on the edge of Street Lewis. The walls were thin, the cots crowded, and the men broken in ways no scalpel could reach. She worked quietly, efficiently. She dressed wounds. She read aloud to those who had gone blind. She wrote letters for men who had no hands, left to write their own. But there were no letters from Luke. No one could tell her if he had survived the march, the trial, or whatever purgatory the army sent half-saved rebels into. She asked discreetly at first, then less and less. She told herself silence was safer than hope. Until the letter came. It was left on her cot during the night. No envelope, no return address, just a single sheet of paper, folded twice, her name written in a handwriting she had not seen in a year but would never forget. Inside, it said, "To the girl with prairie eyes, I still owe you a summer." That was all. She pressed the note to her lips, then tucked it into the inside of her coin purse. It stayed there through months of quiet waiting, through long days of tending wounds, through nights when the ache in her chest returned like fever. Then, one afternoon, a new patient was wheeled in from a field transport. "Shell shock," the orderly said. "He caught a blast near Franklin. Blind. They don't know if it's permanent." Elise approached the cot slowly, clipboard in hand. The man lay still, his face gaunt and bandaged, eyes covered with gauze. His hands, though bruised, rested open at his sides. She reached for his chart. The name read, Lucas McCallan. Her fingers trembled. She dropped the clipboard. The man turned his head slightly. "I heard that," he said with a faint smile. "You always drop things when you're nervous, Elise." Her breath caught. "Luke?" she whispered. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me," he murmured. She sank onto the edge of the cot, speechless. His hand found hers, fumbling, then steady. "I followed your voice," he said, "all through the noise. That day in the snow, I kept thinking, if I live, I'll find my way back to her." Tears filled her eyes. She leaned forward, resting her forehead to his. "I never stopped waiting. Even after I wore the wrong colors? I stopped believing in colors the day you bled for me." They sat in silence, not needing more. In the crowded ward, with sawdust floors and the scent of iodine thick in the air, a war ended for them that had not been marked by surrender, but by survival. And the promise of one long summer yet to come. The war had ended, but the wounds it left were slow to heal. For Luke and Elise, the peace of 1865 brought no parade, no clear place to stand, After weeks of recovery, Luke regained his sight, but found his future blurred by a past no one was ready to forgive. Because he had worn gray, because his name had been etched into Southern ranks, many towns turned him away. Some laws, some whispers, others simply a glance that said, "You're not welcome." Elise had seen enough. She handed in her resignation at the veteran hospital without ceremony, packed their belongings, and rode west with Luke. Not as a nurse to a patient, not as a Northern woman and a Confederate man, but as two people bound by what they had chosen, not by what others called them. They reached a small town tucked along the edge of the Colorado frontier. Dirt streets, clapboard buildings, a chapel, and more wounded children than books. No one asked Luke what side he had fought for. No one asked Elise who she had left behind. Perhaps they all had their ghosts here. Together, they opened a clinic in a converted stable and built a one-room schoolhouse next to it. Elise treated frostbite, childbirth, broken bones. Luke carved desks and taught boys from both north and south how to mend leather, how to read maps, how not to carry hate in their knuckles. The town watched, slowly. The first to come were widows with sick babies. Then a boy with a limp who wanted to learn his letters. Then more, always quiet, always watching, but coming nonetheless. By the next spring, their modest life had grown roots. And then came Memorial Day. The town held a gathering by the edge of the graveyard, where wooden crosses bore no flags, just names and dates, carved by trembling hands. Elise stood with a paper in her fingers, heart pounding in her chest. Luke watched from the edge, his hat low, scars still visible beneath his collar. Elise stepped forward and read, not a speech, not a sermon, just a memory. She told the story of a Southern soldier who had taken a bullet not for glory, not for cause, but for her, a Northern nurse, unarmed, accused. She told how he bled on her dress, and how in that moment, nothing else had mattered but life. "He did not ask who I voted for," she said, voice shaking. "He saw a woman, frightened, and he stood between me and death. That is the kind of man he was. That is the kind of man he is." The silence that followed was taut. Wind rustled the trees like an uneasy breath. Then an old man stepped forward, bent-backed, hand on a cane. A Union pin still glinted on his chest. "I saw him once," the man said, his voice like gravel. "The day after Gettysburg. He gave water to our wounded. No one else did. I remember his face." He turned to Luke, then back to the crowd. "He wore gray, but that day, he was my brother." A murmur rippled. Then a woman clapped. Then another. Someone whispered, "He saved her." Luke stepped beside Elise, his hand finding hers. She did not flinch from the crowd. She stood taller. Afterward, people approached. Some left flowers, some just nodded, but all of them looked at Luke with something new in their eyes. Not pity, not suspicion. Recognition. Josie, a girl from the schoolhouse, tugged Luke's sleeve. "Will you teach me how to carve a cross for my papa?" she asked. He knelt beside her. "I will," he said gently, "and we'll make it strong." The sun dipped low, casting gold across the graves. Where once there had been silence, now there were words. Where once there had been enemies, now there was memory. And just beyond the fence line, crocus flowers bloomed, purple, fragile, and impossibly brave. And so, in the dust of war and the bloom of wildflowers, love took root, quiet, stubborn, and true. Luke and Elise were never meant to meet. But in a world torn by sides, they chose something braver than loyalty. They chose each other. If this story moved you, if you felt the bullet, the silence, the bloom in the graveyard, tap that heart, hit subscribe, and join us here at Wild West Love Stories. Because out here, where enemies become family, and hearts fire truer than guns, love still rides, one tale at a time. Subscribe now for more stories where history meets heart. Welcome to the family.